You know that feeling when the room is full of people who claim to love you, but their eyes are sharp, their smiles jagged, like they're waiting for you to trip so they can say they saw it coming? That's what it felt like at my own dining table, surrounded by family, people who were supposed to be my safe harbor, laughing at my unraveling like it was the evening's entertainment. It was Thanksgiving, the first one we'd hosted in the house Jamal and I had poured our souls into for 4 years to call our own. I'd spent weeks planning, chopping, roasting, folding napkins into perfect little fans, and stringing fairy lights across the mantel to make it feel like something out of a dream. I wanted this night to be love, to be warmth, to be proof that I belonged. Instead, it became the night my world split open, and my 7-year-old son, Malik, became the one to stitch it back together. The house was a 2-story craftsman in a sleepy North Carolina suburb, with creaky hardwood floors and a wraparound porch that caught the sunset just right. We'd bought it last spring, after years of scraping by, me working night shifts at the hospital and Jamal pulling doubles at the auto shop. It was our dream, the kind of place where you could imagine your kid growing up, chasing fireflies in the backyard, or reading comic books under a blanket fort. I'd pictured Malik's laughter echoing down the halls, his toy cars lined up along the staircase. That Thanksgiving, I wanted to christen the house with a memory we'd all carry forever, a moment of togetherness, of family. I spent days prepping, marinating a turkey in my mama's secret recipe, baking cornbread from scratch, and arranging a centerpiece of pine cones and dried roses that I'd spent hours perfecting. I even handwrote place cards with silver ink, each name curling like a promise. I wanted them to see me, really see me, not just as Jamal's wife, not just as Malik's mama, but as Zora, the woman who'd built this life from nothing. By the time the guests arrived, the house smelled of sage and cinnamon, with jazz humming softly from the speakers. I'd been up since 4 a.m., checking the oven, smoothing my dress, reapplying lip gloss to hide the exhaustion tugging at my edges. I needed to look unbreakable, like the kind of woman who could hold a family together no matter what. Jamal's mother, Evelyn, was the first to walk through the door, her perfume heavy with gardenia, her smile tight and practiced. She hugged. Malik barely glanced at me and commented on the centerpiece. "Oh, store-bought flowers? That's quaint." I bit my tongue, smiled, and said, "I arranged them myself, actually." She didn't respond, just moved to the living room with that air of someone who's already decided you're not enough. Jamal's brother, Trey, showed up next with his new girlfriend, Kiana, who clung to his arm like she was auditioning for a role. Then came Aunt Lorraine, dripping in gold bangles and gossip, her laughter loud enough to drown out the music. My sister Lena arrived with our dad, Marcus, and their presence was like a deep breath in a room running out of air. Marcus had been my rock since I was a girl, and for Malik, he was everything. A grandfather who showed up for school plays, taught him how to whistle, and never missed a chance to tell him he was enough. Malik called him Pop Pop, and the way his face lit up when Marcus walked in made my heart ache with something like gratitude. As we sat down to eat, the table was a picture of perfection. Gold-rimmed plates, candles flickering, the turkey glistening under the chandelier. I looked around, trying to feel what I was supposed to. Gratitude, love, belonging. But beneath the clink of glasses and the forced small talk, I felt the cracks. Jamal barely looked at me. He laughed with Trey about some basketball game, scrolled through his phone, and ignored the spread I'd spent days preparing. Evelyn made little jabs, her voice syrupy but sharp. "Oh, Zora, you didn't stuff the turkey? My mama always said that's what makes it special." I smiled, always smiled, because that's what I'd learned to do. Be pleasant, be perfect. Don't let them see you break. Malik was the light in the room, his eyes bright as he passed out. Little drawings he'd made for everyone, construction paper cards with stick figures and glitter hearts. He handed one to Evelyn that said, "Happy Thanksgiving, Grandma," with a turkey drawn in crayon. She barely glanced at it, just tucked it under her plate like it was a napkin. I saw the flicker of hurt in Malik's eyes, but he didn't say anything. He never did when it came to her. He just kept smiling, telling stories about his science project, or the time he and Pop-Pop caught a fish that was this big. Everyone laughed, but it was the kind of laughter that felt like it was at him, not with him. We were halfway through dessert, my pecan pie, the one Malik helped me make, with whipped cream he'd churned himself, when it happened. The room shifted, like the moment before a storm when the sky goes still. Evelyn leaned forward, her wine glass catching the candlelight, and said, "Jamal, you sure that boy's yours? He's got more of Zora's daddy in him than you." The words landed like a blade, sharp and deliberate. I froze, my fork hovering over my plate, waiting for Jamal to laugh it off, to say, "Ma, stop playing." But he didn't. He leaned back in his chair, took a slow sip of his bourbon, and said, "Who even knows who the real father is?" The room tilted. I thought I'd misheard him, that maybe the bourbon had loosened his tongue into some cruel joke. But then I looked at him, really looked, and saw no trace of humor, just a smirk, cold and careless, like he'd been waiting to say it. Evelyn laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that pierced the air. Trey chuckled, shaking his head like it was all good fun. Lorraine's bangles clinked as she covered her mouth, her eyes glinting with something like triumph. Lena's jaw dropped, her eyes darting to me, but she didn't speak. Marcus's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles whitening against the tablecloth. And Malik, my sweet, bright Malik, sat still, his fork abandoned, his eyes fixed on his plate. The laughter wasn't loud, but it was real, and it cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't just that they believed it, that they thought I could betray Jamal, that they thought Malik wasn't his. It was that Jamal let them. He didn't defend me, didn't defend our son. He just sat there sipping his drink, letting the lie fester like a wound. My stomach churned, my hands went cold, and I felt my throat tighten until I could barely breathe. I wanted to scream, to throw the pie across the room, to demand why he'd say something so cruel in front of our child. But before I could find my voice, Malik found his. He stood up, my 7-year-old boy, small in his navy button-up shirt, the one he'd picked because he said it made him look fancy like Pop-Pop. He pushed his chair back, the scrape of wood against wood slicing through the laughter. The room went quiet, every eye turning to him. Even Evelyn's smile faltered. "I know who my dad is," he said, his voice clear and steady, like he'd been practicing the words his whole life. I stopped breathing. Jamal's glass paused midair. Malik looked around the table, his eyes meeting each person's, unflinching, unafraid. "And it's not you," he said, staring straight at Jamal. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the candles flickering, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Malik stood taller, his little chest rising and falling, his fists clenched at his sides. "I heard you," he said, his voice trembling but strong. "Last month, when you were on the phone in the garage, you said you didn't want to be my dad anymore. You said you only stayed because it looked bad to leave." Jamal's face went slack, his mouth opening like he wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. Malik turned to the table, his gaze sweeping over Evelyn, Trey, Lorraine, all the people who'd laughed like his existence was a punchline. "My real dad," he said, pointing to Marcus, "is sitting right there." Marcus's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't move, didn't blink, just looked at Malik like he was seeing every moment they'd shared, every bedtime story, every scraped knee, every late-night talk about superheroes and courage. Pop taught me how to tie my shoes," Malik said. "He comes to my soccer games, even when it's raining. He tells me I'm strong, even when I'm scared. That's what a dad does. He turned back to Jamal, his voice softer now but no less fierce. You're just the guy who lives here. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Trey muttered something under his breath. Lorraine whispered, Jesus, child, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Lena reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it so tight I felt her pulse. I wanted to pull Malik into my arms, to shield him from the weight of what he'd just done, but he stood firm, his eyes locked on Jamal, waiting for a response. Jamal laughed, but it was hollow, forced. Malik, sit down, he said, his voice sharp, like he was scolding a stranger. You don't know what you're talking about. But Malik didn't move. He didn't flinch. He looked at Jamal the way Marcus looked at people who crossed him, steady, unyielding, like he'd already won. I know enough, Malik said. I know you don't love us. Not really. I stood up then, my legs shaky but my heart steady. I didn't plan what I was going to say, but the words came anyway, spilling out like water from a broken dam. You don't get to do this, I said to Jamal, my voice low but cutting. You don't get to humiliate me, to humiliate our son, in front of your family and call it a joke. I turned to Evelyn, whose mouth was still open, her wine glass trembling in her hand. And you don't get to laugh like my life is your entertainment. You've never accepted me, never accepted Malik, and I'm done pretending it's okay. Jamal's eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. Zora, you're making a scene, he said, like I was the one who'd thrown the first stone. We can talk about this later. No, I said, my voice rising now, filling the room. We're done talking. You want to tell lies in front of everyone? Then you can hear the truth in front of them too. I looked around the table, at the faces that had judged me for years, that had whispered behind my back, that had made me feel like I was always auditioning for a role I'd never get. Jamal hasn't been here, I said. Not for me, not for Malik. He shows up when it's convenient, when it makes him look good. But when it's hard, when it's real, he's gone. Everything Malik knows about love, about strength, about being a man, he learned from my dad, from me, from people who actually show up. Marcus's eyes were wet, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. Pride, love, pain, all tangled together. Jamal stood up, his chair scraping against the floor, his face twisted with something between anger and shame. This is ridiculous, he snapped. You're all blowing this out of proportion. He looked at me, then at Malik, like he was searching for an exit. I'm not doing this. And then he walked out, grabbing his jacket from the hook. By the door, the slam of it echoing like a gunshot. No one followed him. Not Evelyn, not Trey, not Lorraine. The room was still. The kind of still that comes after something breaks. And you're all just standing there, staring at the pieces. Malik sat down, his shoulders squared, his head high. He didn't look small anymore. He looked like he'd grown, 10 years in 10 minutes. I crouched beside him, my hand on his back. You okay, baby? I asked. He nodded, his eyes meeting mine. I just wanted them to know, he said. I wanted them to stop laughing. I smiled, my heart swelling, with pride and breaking all at once. You did good, I said. You told your truth. That's the bravest thing there is. And in that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of what I'd thought my family was, I realized we weren't shattered. We were free. The days after Thanksgiving were quiet, but not the kind of quiet that feels like defeat. It was the kind of quiet that comes when you've been carrying something heavy for so long you forgot how it felt to set it down. The dining table still held the remnants of that night, crumbs on plates, a half-eaten pie, Malik's glittery card to Evelyn, unopened and forgotten. Jamal didn't come home that night. He texted once, a single word. Space. I didn't reply. Space was the one thing he'd always taken without asking. I stood in the kitchen the next morning, watching Malik eat cereal at the counter, his dinosaur pajamas wrinkled from sleep. He looked different, not older exactly, but surer, like he'd crossed a bridge I didn't even know was there. "Mama," he said, milk dripping from his spoon. "Are we going to be okay?" I knelt beside him, brushing a curl from his forehead. "We're more than okay," I said. "We're us." He smiled, and it was the first time in days I felt like I could breathe. Over the next week, the house felt lighter, like it was exhaling with us. No more tiptoeing around Jamal's moods, no more pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I started cleaning out the things that didn't belong. His sneakers by the door, his half-read magazines on the coffee table, the cologne that lingered in the bathroom. It wasn't about erasing him, it was about making room for us. Marcus started coming over more, picking Malik up for guys' nights, where they'd build model rockets or watch old kung fu movies. Lena called every day, her voice a lifeline, reminding me who I was before. I started trying to be someone else's version of perfect. I signed us up for therapy, me to untangle the years of doubt Jamal had woven into me, Malik to process the weight of what he'd heard and said. Our therapist, Dr. Ellis, had a voice like warm honey and a way of asking questions that made you feel safe enough to answer honestly. "What do you want your life to feel like, Zora?" she asked me in our first session. I didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time, I felt like I could find one. I filed for separation a week after Thanksgiving, not out of spite, but because I owed it to Malik, to myself, to build a home where love wasn't a performance. Evelyn called once, her voicemail dripping with judgment. "Zora, I'm disappointed in how you let things escalate. Malik shouldn't have spoken to his father that way." I deleted it before she could finish. She didn't get to rewrite the story, not anymore. Malik started asking bigger questions, the kind that make you realize kids see more than you think. "Why do grown-ups lie when they're scared?" he asked one night, curled up on the couch with his dinosaur plushie. "Because sometimes they think the truth will hurt more," I said. "But it doesn't. Not always." He nodded, like he was filing that away, and I realized that's what we were doing now, building a life where the truth wasn't something to hide from. The house felt different without Jamal's shadow in it. I replaced the old family photos, the ones where we smiled because we thought we had to, with new ones. Malik with paint on his face from art class, Marcus and Malik laughing on the porch swing, me at the hospital in my scrubs, grinning after a long shift. These were our moments, our truths, and they filled the walls with something real. One night, a month after Thanksgiving, Malik came into my room, his pajamas dragging on the floor. "Mama," he said, climbing onto the bed. "Do you think I'm brave?" I pulled him close, his warmth grounding me. "Baby, you're the bravest person I know," I said. "You stood up for what's true, even when it was hard. That's what heroes do." He smiled, his eyes heavy with sleep, and I realized he wasn't just my son anymore. He was my teacher, my mirror, my reminder that courage doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. This is our story now. Not the one I planned, not the one I thought I needed, but the one we're writing together. It's messy, it's raw, it's ours. And if you're reading this, if you've ever felt like your love wasn't enough, like you had to shrink to fit someone else's idea of you, let me tell you something. You don't. You are enough. Your truth is enough. And sometimes, the smallest voice in the room is the one that changes everything.